Yes, welcome. This is A RAP CRITIC. I'm your boy Malik 16, the founder and creator of Plates and Crates and the Rap Ruler. And no, I'm not the father and he's not the son. This is just representing, holding it down for our once family restaurant that held a special place in life. A shout out to the whole tri-state area. Everyone who's ever been the father and son, seafood and steak and take. Shout out to my father. But today, a special guest, none other than the crowd favorite. A lot of y'all seem to like when this young man joins us. He's like the unofficial co-host, nephew. Why don't you go introduce yourself? Tell the world who you are.
What's up, y'all? My name is Ramel. I'm his nephew. I've been up here, and then we're gonna review another album today.
Yep. And today, what album are we going over, good sir?
Migos Culture came out in 2017.
2017. Culture, the first one, which is widely considered a classic by a lot of people, especially in the generation that my nephew represents. And so that's why we're talking about it today. And we're going to figure out just how classic is this classic. This makes this the second album on this channel that's only 5 years old that we're going and putting through our system, the Rap Ruler, which I hope by now all of you have gone to and checked. Go ahead, sign up, become a member. You're privy to all kinds of dope prizes like our famous I Used to Love Her t-shirt, and of course the dope luxury gift box for my prize partner, T is the name. Little background, this album was released in the beginning of 2017 to wide reception, and we're gonna go ahead and go through category 1 where we talk about the album, the product itself. So, Ramel, the first dimension that we talk about in category 1 is the quality of the production. Let's see how many different producers.
DJ Khaled was on here.
DJ Khaled, who didn't produce on there. He didn't produce at all. Do we consider DJ Khaled a producer?
I mean, yeah, he produces songs.
Really need to check one day and see if Khaled produces anything, or if he really is just a DJ and a personality. But I was always under the impression that Quavo produced a lot of the Migos stuff earlier on. You ever heard that?
Yeah.
You're right. But on this album, they have mostly outside production from, a mixture of up-and-coming producers and well-known Atlanta producers. So you got producers like Ricky Rax, Keanu Beats, 808 Gods, and people part of the whole 808 Mafia crew, right? But you also have producers like Cassius J, Bron, Buddha Bless, Cardo, Murder Beats, and more well-known producers like Zaytoven and Metro Boomin. But there's way too many producers to name, all contributing to the styles and the feels that were popular at the time. I'll say this, the Zaytoven production is going to give you more of the laid-back vibe, R&B inspired, piano-led tracks like Big on Big and Brown Paper Bag. It's where you're going to get more of that softer feel. I read somewhere that Slippery was unorthodox for them because it was this like modulated beat and it just kept kind of weaving in and out that just kind of trippy beat. But there's elements of T-shirt that sound like that too, where the sound in the background is warping in and out as the drum pattern stays consistent. So you're gonna see a lot of that. It's a lot of that trap pattern with all of the drums, even if the instrumentation on the songs is more mellow or lighter. Surprisingly, they don't have any up-tempo tracks. Like, they don't get too turned up here. There's no song on here like Fight Night, you know what I mean? Or songs you might hear on older Migos releases. They stay in a mid-tempo to slower tempo kind of groove, and maybe because the lean influence is so heavy on here, I'm beginning to believe that around the last decade or so, the last 2 decades, rappers have started catering their music for the kind of drugs that they expect their audience to be on when they're listening to it. So that could be part of the mood too. It's like chill out, but the drums are what do the knocking for us. We don't need to turn up a lot, instrumental wise or pacing and tempo wise, because we're gonna turn up ourselves. With all of these different producers, they're all capturing the sound that was the most prominent in Atlanta at the time. Probably the most different production wise are the singles like Bad and Bougie and Slippery. Call Casting borrows more of a chimey, almost like the type of music you hear in an old kung fu flick.
There are tracks like What's the Price, which incorporates this heavy electric guitar, real soulful electric guitar sounds, and it's all throughout, to the point where there's even a guitar solo that ends it. Kind of some of the stuff that we heard on, like, you know, the 90s R&B when they really wanted to show out. And so that instrumentation is going to sound like nothing else you get on the album, with tracks like All Ass uses this heavy synth kind of guitar sound, almost like Rubber Bandish. And, you know, Get Right With You and All Ass are the two middle road songs like Bad and Bougie, where that's probably the closest you get to things are being made with a club feel in mind.
Travis Scott song sounds more
Kelly Price.
Yeah, Kelly Price. That sounds like darker, and so does the song with 2 Chainz, Deads, where it sounds like really eventful with these haunting horns.
And throughout the album, you're gonna hear lots of woodwind instrumentation, lots of flutes, and we're not talking about jazz flutes or the typical flutes. We're talking about like Renaissance era flutes. You know, these really royal, Victorious sounding horns are, and they're also distant. They're very much so in the background. They're not the main melody. They're just always accents.
So you have beats like that. You have the more chimey beats. You have the more R&B inspired beats. But trap is the thread that keeps them all together. Anything you notice about the production here?
Every beat had its own different pitch, sound, tone, you know. And one of the beats I could really distinguish from all of the songs, was the T-shirt beat, the song T-shirt, because that one was different.
Yeah. Even though it was very simple, it really is this, you know, 808 simple drum track, and then those warping sounds in the background. But for some reason, it stands out. And, you know, I'll say a lot of what makes the beats pop and separates them is what Migos does over it. We'll talk more about that as we go on, but something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Ramel, what would you give the production on a scale from 1 to 5 for this album?
A 5.
Wow, top-notch production, you say, huh?
It had a great production. I can say that about the album.
Okay, it takes us to dimension 2. The cohesiveness of the sonic bed. So we mentioned this, for as many producers that this album has no less than 15 different producers contributing. How solid, how tight does it sound all together? Do the beats complement each other? You know, if we're talking about sequence, I'd say Migos does a really interesting job of how they roll out their eventful beats and then their softer beats. So Culture, we can say, is an eventful beat. The intro, I mentioned Deads. These things have big sounds and big horns, dark synths. Right after that, at least 2 songs away from each of those eventful songs, they'll put something simple in it. So track 11, Between Kelly Price and Deads, is one of those more simpler, subtle beats. And then Get Right With You and Slippery being a little smoother before they go back to some of that bigger production sound. So I mean, sequence wise, you could tell there was some kind of mind here to not put all the songs that sounded like next to each other.
Yeah.
Even though I will say towards the end it sounds like songs that are about women are kind of like tucked away.
Towards the end, yeah. And what's the song before Bad and Bougie?
Call Casting.
You could tell from hearing Call Casting to the being the next song, Bad and Bougie, you could hear the difference between those two. Like Bad and Bougie, especially when the beat drops and you hear a little piano in the background.
Mm-hmm.
That's different.
Yeah, Bad and Bougie it's somewhere in between all of the other songs. It's somewhere between being eventful but subtle. It's not eventful the same way Dead's is. They don't announce anything. It just comes on with that hard synth, and he's like, yeah, we've been getting money for a long time, but it ain't old money. And then the beat comes in with that consistent melody, and it's subtle, but it knocks. So how well do you think it all goes together? You gave this a pretty high ranking for Dimension 1. If you put all the beats together, do you think they blend well?
Yeah, because it's not just, it goes, the first 5 songs is hard beats, then it goes to soft. No, it's in between. You have some chill, calm beats, then you have the hard beats, then you have a smooth one, 808 Mafia, Metro Boomin, that's their specialties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they pieced that together perfectly.
Nice. So what would you give it on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats?
A 5.
A 5. All right. That's something for y'all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, how well it all goes together with all these producers. And, keeping in mind, trap is the direction. Dimension 3, the intentional mood or tone. So this album is called Culture. In A.R. Shaw's book, Trap History, he notes that Migos single-handedly shifted the culture just with the releases of singles that came leading up to this album. So the run that they created from Versace, where they had this newness of reintroducing, because they did not invent, and we talked about this in the Twister episode when we went over Adrenaline Rush. You can go back and find that, by the way. That they did not invent the triplet style of rap. The triplet style existed going as far back as the 80s, and you can look at some of Chuck D's rhyme patterns on Public Enemy albums, but they brought back something that we hadn't heard popular in mainstream since Bone Thugs and Harmony. And they made it where it was distinctive and easy to hone in on. I remember when Bone Thugs were out, people didn't know how to define their sound. They're like, oh, they rap fast, but it really wasn't fast. Is that they were rapping on this certain part of the beat that would fit this many syllables in this kind of pattern, which is called the triplet style, where you just right? And so with Versace, they brought that back into the conversation, made it a conversation, the same way that Big Sean and Drake made the pause flow a topic of conversation, and rappers started beefing about who invented that flow, right? Everyone knows I ball, chemo. And so that's the first shift of culture. Then they came out with the Look at My Dab, which coincided with the dabbing craze. And then from there, we saw the dabbing Santa. And so they contributed to all of that. And Bad and Bougie being the single leading up to this album's release, bringing attention to Atlanta's trap music. The idea is that this album was a celebration of them shifting the culture with all these movements that came before this album. But if you ask me on the album why it's named Culture besides that, I'd have a harder time explaining it to you, because I don't think there's anything on this album that says this is why we named the album Culture. Did you pick up on anything that's like a continuous theme, or what's the mood that you think they were trying to bring across on this album?
I mean, well, thinking about it now, it really is just about how they're up now. They talk about money from songs like Big on Big and stuff.
Yeah, I think Big on Big is a song that kind of sums up what they're trying to say on this album. It's just that every now and then they go into darker territory where, Big on Big is more about money and flexing, but then every now and then they get a little bit more street. But as far as any theme, the theme is definitely we're young, we're rich. You can't do what we do.
There's a line where Quavo says something to the extent of, you talk about modern rap, but they don't know the culture. And that is the closest. That's the only time that you hear anything, any semblance of identifying the title of the album with the content of the album, which is a quick, response and statement to, the old heads who at the time were leading these contentious debates about whether or not this newer rap was hip hop at all, since it seemed that the younger rappers weren't even respecting the roots of hip hop and acknowledging what came before them. And this was the beginning of the term mumble rap. So you started seeing that big divide between the quote unquote old heads, which I guess now I represent, and the younger rappers, which is going to be interesting when Migos realizes that they're old heads now. But that's the closest you get to that reference point.
This dimension is always about the mood that you think the group wanted to put across and how well they did it. If we're all kind of scratching our heads about it, that means maybe there wasn't this like tight job done by the artist of executing that. And it's not so much the mood you feel because your mood can change every time you hear it out. So that's something to keep in mind. What are you going to give this on a scale from 1 to 5 when it comes to intentional mood and tone?
I'll give it like a 4.
Okay. We'll go into dimension 4, where we talk about the song distinction and repetition of sounds and words. You were saying something about the songs not sounding the same. And sonically, we keep touching on it. There's this common thread of trap drums, 808s are there. Every now and then there's a couple beats that use modulated sounds. But for the most part, the patterns are similar because the drums are similar. But the actual song instrumentation varies. You get in all kinds of instruments and all kinds of different synth sounds. Words, though, you're gonna hear a lot of the same words repeated. I mentioned the lean influence is very, very prominent here, and I don't know if we can look at this album as a marker of when lean started becoming something that everyone was talking about, because lean has existed in hip-hop music for so long, especially from our Texas rappers. The Atlanta rappers were talking about it for a while too, but what Migos is doing on this album, they're naming the brand they use a lot. So Activist, which is the former cough syrup and that they were talking about, they drop that in every other song. And sometimes they shorten it, sometimes they say this, sometimes they say act. And for those of us not familiar with those brands, we don't know you're just listening to it, you probably didn't even catch up on it, but it's mentioned a lot. Paddock watches are mentioned a lot. What else do you hear a lot of on here?
Bag. Yeah. Watch, diamonds.
Yeah.
Like you said,
They definitely talk about, I guess Molly was still very prominent and popping back then, so Molly gets mentioned a lot, especially when they talk about women. In the songs where they talk about women, they always kind of mention Molly in conjunction with that.
I got really just a lot of money talk, a lot of, how my diamonds look, chains, watches, and stuff. Like I got the wealthiness of the album, of how much they got now.
They might even talk about the restaurants they eat at. A lot of restaurant name dropping, a lot of car type dropping. I hear Lambo a lot.
Money talk,
Yeah, money talk, but I'm just, specific words you'll hear on a lot of songs. Bando, you're gonna hear a lot. But keep in mind, Migos used to call their studio where they recorded a lot of their songs the Bando. But you will get a fair amount of repetition of words. Sounds might be debatable. Again, if you think that some of the beats start sounding repetitious, it's probably because of the drum patterns and less because of the melodies and the instruments. But something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5. Heartbeats, what you giving this on repetition on a scale from 1 to 5?
3. Because it was, yeah.
Because what?
It was just really the same things every song.
Okay. Which takes us to dimension 5, the amount of content versus the amount of songs. It's a 13-song album, and every last song is a song. There's no skits and interludes. It's all songs, 13 straight, which gives the impression that Migos sought out to make a classic. I feel like when rappers go for those numbers, they kind of want to keep it concise and let you know that each song has a purpose. But if we're talking topical songs, things they're talking about where they definitely have a direction and a point compared to how many tracks there are, that's a different question. And so there are not many songs on here where there's a clear separation from what the last song was about. Me and Ramel mentioned that there are songs on here where you can tell it's more geared towards women, but they still find a lot of time in their verses to flex and talk money talk, as Ramel pointed out, and drug talk. And so it's not really the clearest. It's usually the hook that's the distinguishing factor. It's like, oh, the other song was talking to guys in the hook. This one says the word shorty or something. You get that?
Yeah.
What do you think about the amount of content? For 13 tracks, do they have any songs where they're talking about anything?
It was really just the same, almost the same thing on every song.
Yeah. I mean, if y'all find something different content-wise that, makes you feel like there's a rounded balance of 13 songs, because 13 is not that long. We've seen really long albums. It's a really safe number, but not one clear song where you're talking about, okay, this is a topic.
Out Your Way is closest to a whole song with content.
Some might argue Big on Big is a topic. It's probably the clearest of this is about money flexing more than it is about anything else. So something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5. So you're giving it a what?
A 2.
Okay. All right, that takes us to Dimension 6. Let's get into it. The features. Who we got on this album?
DJ Khaled, Gucci Mane, and Travis Scott.
You also have Lil Uzi Vert.
Oh yeah, on Bad and Bougie.
And 2 Chainz.
Oh yeah, on Deads.
Mm-hmm.
5 features on 13 songs out of 13.
So the question when we consider features, is this too many features for a 13-track album?
No.
Okay. And do these features help? Do they hurt?
Help.
Okay. Do we need DJ Khaled on that intro? Do you do anything to really help that?
He really got you just pumped and excited to hear the album, because the whole intro, he's like, are y'all ready? Are y'all ready for culture? This is we the best. He was just getting ready.
Okay.
So.
What about Gucci Mane's presence? Did he help that song? Did he hurt it?
He helped.
Okay.
Him on the song flowing.
Just for contrast, and I think this is also right around the time, shortly after Gucci got out, right?
Yeah.
The new Gucci too, and everybody was saying he's a clone, and all this talk about how much money him and his wife had saved. His book was about to drop. So, if for nothing else, Gucci's presence while he was still, hot off the presses was just a smart move to show Atlanta solidarity, to pay homage. So it was good timing, if nothing else. Now, 2 Chainz, did he help or hurt?
He just did his thing. He didn't downplay it, well, he kind of helped it a little, he just did his part.
Yes. Sometimes features, they don't move the needle at all. It's just they're there. It's neutral.
Yeah.
That's how you feel?
Yeah.
Yeah. With Travis Scott, it almost seemed like his presence on the song turned it into a more Travis Scott sounding song. By this point in the album, Quavo's doing a lot of singing on the hooks, but having Travis Scott's voice on there too made it have this haunting quality because of those effects that Travis Scott always puts on his voice. So that hook sounded different than any other hook. I wonder if you weren't a hardcore fan and you heard the song, if you would even know Travis Scott was on there, because he sounds like one of the Migos.
No, I can't hear him. His flow is way different from any of theirs, and he uses a lot more auto-tune.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't really sit here and say he's the 4th one.
Okay, fair enough. Lil Uzi Vert, does he help or hurt?
Help.
Okay. When this song came out as a single and it was playing everywhere, one of the few times you'll hear songs where they play the whole thing because they want you to hear Uzi's verse. And a lot of places you go, after the first verse and the hook, they switch to the next song. Here, you know, they were playing the whole song because everybody's verses were so stand out, but it made it eventful. And you know, me and my boys, rest in peace to Jordan, we really used to go in and have fun when the Uzi verse comes in, because it's just so over the top, especially if you factor in the video presence and like his gestures. This is when he became famous for the shoulder shimmy. Lil Uzi Vert is the only non-Southern feature on the album. Everyone else is from the South. For a minute, it was going to be just an Atlanta party with Travis Scott representing Texas and DJ Khaled representing Miami, give you that rounded Southern flavor. So it's almost probably a high compliment at that time that Uzi was invited to be a guest on this album that was distinctly Southern and trap. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Ramel, what you giving this for the features on a scale from 1 to 5?
I give it a 4, because you know every feature did its thing, but you know 2 Chainz was just right there.
Got you. If it was somebody else swapped out for 2 Chainz, it would have took it up for you.
Yeah.
All right, that takes us to Dimension 7. The question of, do the weakest songs, or does the weakest song on the album weigh it down? Are there any weak songs on here?
I didn't really like Big on Big that much.
So when you listen to this, there's songs you skip?
Yeah, like pretty much like Big on Big. I don't really like the flow of that song. Like, how you gonna get Big on Big? Like, I don't really like it that much.
Gotcha. Some of the softness is going to be off-putting to people. So if you're not here for the softer songs, then Big on Big and, you know, track 11 and maybe even the last song are going to throw you off, and you might skip because you only want to hear the harder cuts. Also, if you don't like some of those features, that's going to be a takeaway. We just talked about DJ Khaled. If you don't feel like hearing him scream over tracks and say F-boy like 10 times, then you're probably not going to replay that song very much and think it's weak. If you don't like Travis Scott, if you don't like Gucci Mane, if you don't like 2 Chainz, if you don't feel Uzi Vert was needed and you'd rather Takeoff have had a verse on there, then you're going to feel those are weak. Something I meant to bring up on Dimension 4 is the idea that Get Right With You. If you listen to later Migos albums, the single that they come out with on Culture 3, Straightening, it uses the same instrumentation. That I thought that was interesting that they recycled that sound for that. But that wouldn't be something that reflects as a weakness on this song. But if you're listening to subsequent Migos albums, I can imagine anybody who heard that would think that that song might be a little weak because it sounds so much like. It's always super subjective. It's always up to you what you think is weak. But the bigger question is it so weak that it brings the album down a little bit? Like, if you're like, if they should have left this song off, then that's a big weakness. And it's something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Ramel, what are you giving this for weakest song on the scale from 1 to 5?
I give it a 3.
3. So right in the middle.
Yeah.
Pretty safe. Okay. All right. Dimension 8, Mass Appeal. How far reaching was this album going to be? So if we factor in everything that we talked about in Dimension 3, where we were talking about the overall tone, the idea is that Migos already shifted the culture by everything they did before this album was released. So the stage was perfectly set. They had probably one of the best lead-ins in hip-hop history, The Takeover. And getting that nod at the last minute, right when this album was being released, right after Bad and Bougie was bubbling, made it explode. You got the biggest star, the newest hit show, saying, thank Migos for putting out the song Bad and Bougie. That creates curiosity from people who weren't listening before. So they got their regular audience that was going to gravitate to what they're doing, you know, and then you got all these new people like, who's this group? What's this song that Donald Glover's talking about? Bam. And the way things go in hip hop culture is if something becomes catchy enough, even if you're laughing at it at first, it starts to become embraced and repeated. So even if you were one of those people that didn't like the song, but you were laughing at the fact that it said raindrop, drop top, you'll find yourself saying it a week later as a joke with you and your friends, and then now you like the song because it has a special place in your life. Either you were laughing at it first or you loved it from the beginning. Either way, you wind up loving it. And then you start learning the words, and then they were playing it on radio everywhere. This was being played in New York like it was a New York song. It was just the anthem. And it came out at a really interesting time. It was a fall song. It's not like it was a summer jam, but it played all the way through the next summer.
Yeah.
You couldn't go anywhere without hearing this. From the intro to the end, like I said, they would play this song all the way till you heard Lil Uzi Vert's verse.
And as it goes so far reaching, I feel like they did a good job because the album was gonna produce. You got a big time rapper who just came out of jail. You're gonna feature him. You had the hottest rapper at the time on Bad and Bougie. You had another hot rapper at the time on and
Kelly Price.
They did a good job.
Yeah, I think timing is everything. Relationships are everything. So this album wound up going platinum and being nominated in the 2018 Grammys for Best Rap Album of the Year. And we talked about single selection. They put the video for Call Casting on World Star. This is one of the final years where World Star was the go-to place. There's so many other avenues that people go now.
This was around the time when if you had a music video on World Star, you made it. Like it was gonna get tons of views and stuff. Every rapper was putting their music videos on World Star.
Right, and they were World Star, not only a World Star premiere video, they went to Africa to film that video, and it shows you that they were already famous. They were already well known out there, and they talked about that experience being impactful for them because they didn't even know they had hardcore fans out there that knew the words to their songs like that. So they were already famous. This was solidifying their fame, and I think it says a lot about who's behind them and themselves being now people that knew the game well. Migos had been in existence since 2008, so they knew the game, and they decided to pick Slippery and T-Shirt for their singles, where I think a lot of A&Rs, if they were on a traditional label, would have made them pick a song like the more obvious songs towards women or the ones that sound like they're for women, and they chose their own lane. They were like, no, we're gonna use T-Shirt, which borrowed from an old Shawty Low line, 17.5, same color T-shirt. Nothing about that song says typical single. You know, it's kind of laid back, but it wound up being just as catchy as Bad and Bougie. And then, like you mentioned, the Gucci Mane effect with the Slippery, even though that beat was different, it still wound up working its way in the clubs. So you got a song that was mostly like for the radio and two songs that were for the clubs, and they wound up reaching a wider audience than they ever reached and becoming, you know, this started the conversations, which we'll talk about in the next dimension, but something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. How much mass appeal did this album have? Ramel, what are you giving this on a scale from 1 to 5 for mass appeal?
Mass appeal 5.
5. Okay, it was a monster album.
Yeah.
All right. Which takes us to Dimension 9, the 3 I's: impact, innovation, influence. All right, we talked a lot about the impact a second ago. What winds up happening is that Migos are known by everyone, not just the South, not just Atlanta, not just trap music fans, but what's happening at the same time, you know, I'm referencing A.R. Shaw's book again, is that trap music is now at the forefront. They are helpful. They're not single-handedly responsible this time because they already single-handedly created all kinds of movements and shifts for hip-hop culture. But this time they are a big part of pushing trap music to being the most popular rap. I remember coming back to the city, you know, coming back home to New York and asking you, why they playing so much trap in New York? You're like, it's just what people want to hear. And now we have the drill music scene, but like at that time, if you weren't doing trap, you know, your music's going, unless you were J. Cole or Kendrick or Drake. And then we started seeing Drake doing more trap collabs after this too. So this album winds up being called the most important album released that year. And people are calling it an instant classic. But I think these conversations start to happen, and this is a big part of why this channel started, is because people often do this thing where they conflate albums with a lot of singles or a lot of popularity in the year they came out as being classic albums. And this channel is always here to examine albums as bodies of work, not always about, you know, what you remember from that year. There's a lot of albums that had hits by rappers that we don't think about anymore, and not necessarily the most artful body of work. But that's the impact. That's why we're talking about this album on this episode now, because people classified this as a classic right away when it came out. And I think a lot of that had to do with the success of the singles. Now, influence and innovation had already been constructed an album ago when they were doing the triplet flow. I don't know if they implemented any new flows here. A lot of the rap styles they were doing on this had already been popular within that same era that this came out, production wise too. You see anything that they innovated on here?
Innovated as in
like something new that they introduced to the game on this album?
Would you say slang in a way, like act and stuff?
I don't know if I heard other rappers doing it. You would know that more than I would. You could totally see the influence. Like every rap album that came out after this in the trap lane had some of these same elements. You know, I think the only thing that became different is how rappers use their voice. Some rappers rap with higher pitches or, you know, gruffer voices, but they were all kind of doing stuff similar to what Migos was doing on this album. I definitely heard a lot more Paddock talk after this album. The influence is there, but it's more subtle, and nobody wanted to sound like they were biting the Migos, but everybody definitely sounded like they took bits and pieces off what this album inspired. That's about the extent. So that's something for y'all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Ramel, what you giving this for impact, influence, and innovation?
A 3.
A 3. Okay. Yeah, because they already kind of did the groundwork. They already proved themselves the album before. All right, final dimension 10. The overall uniqueness and timelessness of this album. So did this album sound like anything released when it came out? And if you listen to it today, does it sound old? Does it sound outdated? Does it sound like 2017? Or you could still bump it now?
Yeah, or for the simple fact that they had that #1 song on the album, Bad and Bougie.
Okay. But as an album, do you think it's like a timeless piece of work?
You can listen to it.
You don't sound sure. You think when you're like my age, you're gonna go back and be like, oh, play that Culture.
Yeah. For some slippery t-shirt and stuff, you know.
But for the singles.
Yeah.
And the memories that you see, you're talking from a place of nostalgia, but as a body of work, do you think this is like, ooh, this is a classic, like this will live on? I can tell you now, I feel like based on what you said, there's a couple beats on here that if you play them like 2 more years from now, you'll be like, ooh, that sounds outdated. That sounds like 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some songs, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so those things kind of take away. This is a very trend album. We talk a lot about albums that don't follow trends. This is an album that was all about trends because it's Migos trying to set trends. And the drawback when you're trying to set trends and also marry trends, because they're also borrowing from what was popular. Trap was popular. They're making a trap album. When trap dies out and people no longer want to hear it, this album might be heralded as one of the gems of trap music, but it will also be buried with trap, unfortunately, because they didn't branch out and do a lot of musically different things. What'd you say?
Say that. I kind of think that Bad and Bougie would even be outdated, because if you was to play 2 years from now, if you was to play that beat, everybody would be like, ooh, people don't make those kind of beats no more. That's an old beat. You
think so?
Yeah, I think that because the song, it's a trap. That's a heavy trap. That no other category.
when I hear melodies like what they use, though, I feel like those things live on forever.
But that's what makes it a trap beat, though. That piano in the background with the bass fitted together, that's a heavy trap beat.
Wow. Now that's something to think about. Something for y'all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5. Heartbeats, take us home. Ramel, what are you giving this on a scale from 1 to 5 for overall uniqueness and timelessness?
A 4.
A 4. All right. Well, that concludes our Category 1 review and analysis of the 2017 classic Culture by the Migos, who are considered by many to be one of the greatest groups, if not the greatest group in hip-hop. Fresh off of us talking about the other group that's talked about as being the greatest, Wu-Tang. I hope you join us for Category 2, where we go over the rap performance on this album. Until then, y'all know what it is. F a Rap Critic. They talk about it while I live it. Word to Beth.